Welcome, Norma. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so glad that you are able to share your testimony. So, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on when you're watching this. So, my name is Norma Brooks. Some people call me Norma, some people call me Liz, some people call me both, Norma Liz. So, there's a story behind that too. So, yeah, I am a Dallas native, first generation American. My parents were born in El Salvador, so I'm proud Salvadoran American. And yeah, I grew up my entire life here in Dallas, Fort Worth. Well, I don't claim Fort Worth. I'm from Dallas. But yeah, I am really, really excited to share my testimony today. A lot of people know me as a real estate agent, business coach, mentor, and they really know me kind of in a business professional setting. And so I'm really excited today to be exposed and be vulnerable and be very transparent in hopes to bless your life for you, whoever's listening. And I hope that there's some encouragement in my testimony today.
Perfect.
So childhood is a lot, but I kind of chose some main points that I wanted to share. So one of the major highlights, if you will, of my life in childhood, in the early years, I experienced witnessing domestic violence between my mom and my biological father. And, you know, as a child, witnessing violence and abuse, you really feel helpless, and there's a sense of, uncertainty. And I would say that my first sort of introduction to what a father is was not good. I think it came with a lot of fear, a lot of maybe anxiety, negative feelings. And so there was one specific instance that I remember that was very, very life changing. And there was another event that kind of led up to this. So I should have kind of known or understood what was happening. But the major incident that happened was that I remember being in the room. We didn't have very much money. We were living in North Dallas in the hood, where we would hear gunshots like nothing, every other night, weekends. And so my dad had, I guess, came home drunk. He struggles with addiction with alcohol. And so, alcohol was always an issue. And alcohol has this way of, for some people who are addicted, unfortunately, and it has a stronghold on them, it really alters their entire state of mind. Like, they turn into a completely different person. And that was the case with my father. He turned into a completely different person who was very violent, very, impulsive is the word. And this particular night, he was fighting with my mom about something, and they were in the kitchen, and we just heard the yelling, the back and forth arguing. And I'm an identical twin, for those of you who don't know. Yes, we look and sound alike, but you can usually tell us apart. So my twin sister actually is the brave one. I always call her, like, she's the fighter. She's my security guard. So she was brave enough. She opened the door and she wanted to see what was all the commotion. So she goes into the kitchen, and my mom is basically being held up against the wall with a machete on her head. And, in El Salvador, everybody has machetes. So, of course, we always had a machete in our house. And so he had pulled out that machete and was holding it literally against her head and telling her that he's going to kill her. I remember hearing that he was going to kill her, and then he was going to kill us, and then he was going to kill himself. So this was a repeated threat that we heard. And this time it was very much real, because it wasn't just a threat, it was actually happening. And so my twin sister managed to distract my dad and kind of pull on his arm so that, to get his attention, because at the time, in the 90s, the phones were hooked to the wall. And so my mom was able to, because of my sister distracting him, she was able to dial 911 very quickly, and he knew he was at risk, because obviously with being from another country, you're at risk of being deported or things like that. So I don't remember every single detail, but that was the main thing I remember. And this was the time that we left. This was the time where my mom had the strength to leave. But prior to that, there were multiple other instances of abuse. And there was another particular one that, as I prepared for this interview or to share my testimony, I recall when he had came home drunk and he kicked the front door down. Like, do you know how much strength it takes to kick a door down? So he kicked the front door of the apartment down and barged in, and my mom, she had already called the police. So the police came and got him. And I remember this particular detail. The next day, I remember it as the next day as a child, we go down to the bail bonds place and we're bailing him out. And I just couldn't believe or understand at the time, why would we go pick up the enemy? Like, why would we go pick up someone who was set on taking us out? And it didn't make sense to me. But I know that even in that moment and in those moments in childhood, God was still working that for my good. And why? Because of who I am today and the advocate that I am now for domestic violence victims today. And if I had never witnessed that, and if I had never experienced that, for one, I wouldn't understand what the true love of a father was, which I was going to experience later on. And two, I wouldn't have the fire inside of me to be the entrepreneur, the business owner, the wife, the mom, the friend that I am. So I really, when I was thinking about this, I said, man, this is why I do what I do. And this is why I refuse to allow someone to give someone that much power, if you will, right? Because I understood as a child that, like, if someone shows you something the first time, you don't need to go back again for them to maybe have changed their mind, right? And I understand there's grace as Christians, and we can talk about that later on. And there's forgiveness. However, forgiveness does not mean reconciliation or reconnection. You can forgive the person. You don't necessarily have to completely forget about it, because we're humans. We're made in the image and likeness of God, but you can't expect yourself to completely erase your past and erase what has happened. And I will say, and I will admit that to a certain degree, I had tucked away some of those childhood memories that were not so good, because that was my way of coping. And so actually being asked to share this was a very eye-opening time for me as I read the questions and as I kind of prepared. And this is not scripted, but I wanted to have a little guidance on what to expect and what I should share. And that's what kind of got me thinking as far as my childhood. That's what really stood out was the difficult times, kind of like going through the valley and then coming out and starting a new life. And I get a kick out of new beginnings. Like, I love new beginnings now because I've had to endure that several times. And this is a little related to the domestic violence, but something else that also stood out to me from childhood was that I went to 4 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, 6 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 4 high schools. And so my entire childhood, I've had to learn to adapt and get out of my comfort zone. And again, it's really God that has been able to sustain me and to keep me in this mindset of not being bitter, and of still loving people, and of still giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I believe that that is a gift, because if you witness things like I did, some people look like what they've been through. You're like, oh, she's had a rough life. They ended up, in drugs and addiction. And I can't relate to that. I can't. So my testimony is a little different in that, not to say that I'm perfect, but as I kind of share some things that have happened in my life, you will see a pattern where I am the victim. There was literally nothing I could have done to prevent something. However, God was with me through every single heartbreak, through every single hardship. And that's the message that I want to convey is like, the abuse is not your fault. Sorry. And I think what happens is when you ask yourself, like, well, why do I have to go through this? Like, I really acted and I did my best and I'm a good person and I love God and I fear God and I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. Why is this happening to me or my children? Or, why do I have to go through that? Or why did I have to go through that? And it's not that you're being punished. And that's like a common misconception that a lot of people have is like, oh, I must have done something to deserve this, right? Like the Pharisees. And if you really read in the Bible and you understand the law and things like that, and there's a lot of legalism, that will teach you that, like, oh, well, there must be something that you did and now you're like karma, or you're reaping what you sowed. But sometimes it's not that you sowed bad seeds, it's that other people also have free will and other people are broken and other people are living through this bloodline, right? And they're repeating a lot of the same behaviors that they saw, and they're repeating this cycle. And it is a choice, right? It is a choice, and it is difficult for some people. But what ended up happening from childhood was that I took on this victim mentality and this woe is me. And I didn't recognize it until later in life. And I realized, you know what? I am not a victim. Like life, and I remember hearing this in 26, 20, and I learned it in business actually. And it was like, life is not happening to you. Life has not happened to you. It has happened for you. And many times the message that we need to hear is not going to come in, hey, let's open the Bible and let's read these scriptures. Like, God is going to speak to you through this podcast. God is going to speak to you through non-believers, like a random person at work that gets on your nerves. God is going to speak to you through dreams. God can speak to you through music. He can use a donkey, right? Literally. He can use anything. He can use a rock. He can use a bush, right? We've seen and read the stories. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so, so that you really understand the nature of God. And I'm not here to preach today. I'm sharing my testimony, but I just wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit on that particular message, because what I don't want is for you as a listener to kind of take away like, oh my gosh, and she went through so much as a child. No, I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but I do want to also raise awareness that you being in that abusive relationship, if that is you and you're not quote unquote doing anything wrong, I want you to understand the damage that it does to children. And even if you think, well, they're just 2 years old, they're not going to remember. No, trauma, they will absolutely remember that. And even if it's not all the details, like me, I can't recollect every detail. However, the trauma, it's like I always compare it to 9/11, right? When 9/11 happened, a lot of people remember where they were at, what they were doing, right? They were maybe at school, they were at a job, and they remember almost every detail of that day for the rest of their lives, because that is a trauma response. And that's the same thing that happened with me. There is a little bit more. The majority, I would say, of my testimony has been my entire childhood. And so there is another testimony that I wanted to share in my fast forward to, or going back to the story that I shared about when, he attempted to kill us and he threatened and, all the things. Well, my mom had gone into on another date, she had gone into a paralegal's office, and it was really for her immigration status or something she was dealing with. And this particular paralegal noticed that my mom had a big bruise on her arm. And, at this point, she had been seeing my mom multiple times. And, ¿qué te pasó? What happened? And she told her, oh, it's because I fell. And it was always some excuse. It was always something. And she finally caught on, and she asked her, are you being abused? Like, does your husband, hit you? And she says, you need to leave. But imagine this, if you put yourself in the shoes, and I put myself in my mom's shoes, we have the same name. So we have a very similar personality. But I put myself in her shoes, and I think, okay, you came from El Salvador. This was your lifelong dream to come to the US so that your children could be born here and provide a life for them. So she has no family, some extended family, but she has no mom like me that I can call and run to. She had no siblings at the time in the US, and where was there to go? He was everything she had, and his family. So her best friend at the time, who I still have a great relationship with, noticed the bruise, and she told her, we're going to figure out a way to get you out. And something along the lines of, we're going to find a place for y'all to stay. She knew a friend who was a property manager in Arlington, Texas. So we were living at the time in North Dallas. So Arlington at the time was like far away for me. I didn't even know what Arlington was. I didn't know anything about it. But the point is, she was able to get an apartment, and my mom made a plan. So she told her, look, you need to have a plan to leave when he's not there. So my mom made a plan. We packed up all of our things during the day, because when my dad would leave drunk, he wouldn't come home for sometimes several days at a time. And so she already kind of knew this pattern. And so she planned to escape when he was gone, so that by the time he came back, there was no trace of anything. And of course, at the time, you didn't have iPhones and, track location, things like that. So, and then just to kind of sprinkle in a little detail here, my mom, he was so controlling to the point that he didn't allow her to learn how to drive. She actually would sneak out at night with us as babies, put us in the back seat, and taught herself how to drive a stick shift vehicle. So my mom is my hero. Like, she is the bravest woman ever. And so she taught herself how to drive. And so by the time we left, she was able to take off in the car, and she already knew how to drive. So we're able to leave, escape to Arlington. We didn't have a bed. We didn't have food. That was the part that got me a little choked up, because it was like, we didn't have a bed. We had to lay blankets down, and there was just ramen noodles and water, but we were happy, and it was just a blessing to have safety and security and stability. And that was what we needed. So it felt safe. We didn't I didn't remember talking to my dad or seeing him for, I don't know, maybe 2 years, a year. I don't remember the exact time, but I do remember my mom getting a call. Eventually, we had made our life in Arlington, and it was his sister. I say she's my favorite aunt. We shouldn't have favorites, but she is. And because she would always make sure we were good. And she told my mom that my dad had been hospitalized, and he was in critical care. His pancreas had ruptured. And if you know anything about the medical things or terminology, when that happens, it's basically like poison because of the bile, right? It's like poison in your body. I'm no expert. I don't know what I'm talking about as far as medical terms, but if you do, then you'll understand. So how life-threatening it is. So my mom ends up picking us up, rushing us to go see him at the hospital. They didn't allow us to visit with him because we were minors, and that's how bad it was. So just to kind of speed up the story a little bit, I don't want to take too much time, but the doctors said, hey, unfortunately, like, he's been in a coma, and it's been a couple weeks, and he's either going to be in vegetable state, he's on life support, and if we pull the plug, he's either going to be in a vegetable state for the rest of his life, or he will be at peace. He won't be in, he, of course, he'll pass away. And at the time, of course, my mom didn't want to have to care for him because, I mean, this was her abuser. And my aunt, didn't want to have to make the decision, but a decision had to be made. So my mom decided that it was best to pull the plug because they gave her the option to decide. And they went ahead and, made the decision. They let us go in and see him through like the glass. And like I said, I don't remember exactly every detail, but I do remember the miracle that happened. And what happened was when they took him off of life support, he actually started breathing on his own after 10 minutes. And it was very scary for the doctors because it had been 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, because they monitor you. And I know that because another time in my life where I had to experience that again, but he came back to life. And till this day, he is living. Thank you, Jesus, for that miracle. And he was able to live. And it's crazy because now, like when he has shared the story, what's really sad, I would say, is that God gave him another chance at life. And he went right back to drinking, y'all. Like you would think after this miracle, after seeing the white light and seeing your life, literally, he says he saw everything that he had done to us and my mom, all the abuse, all the bad things in his life that he had done. He said he was like going towards like a big house. And basically he said it was like images of, his past life and things like that. And he was like going towards this light, like he said it was so bright, like he couldn't look into it and see anything, but he heard a voice, God, and that it wasn't his time yet, so that he had to go back. And so that was the miracle that I remembered that vividly, and knowing God is real, like at a young age, like God is real, because you can't make that up. And he had no motive or no reason, because he doesn't believe in God. Unfortunately, till this day, he doesn't. I can't speak for him to say that he doesn't believe in God, but he is not a believer. Like he is not, nothing to do with a relationship with Jesus. And so I know that it's very real. And that was a very life altering moment for me, because again, I was like, wow, God is giving him another opportunity. And even on, with everything going on, he still went back a few months later to have a drink. And it's I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I know that he had to have like a tube. He's had to have a feeding tube. They had to scrape some skin to reconstruct his stomach. And he I mean, he had to learn how to walk again. That was a whole nother process. So it was just really eye-opening to see, what, no matter what, like we still have a choice. And that's how good of a father God is, that he will never force us to have a relationship with him. He will never force us to love him. It's your choice. It's your decision. And I remember my story, like I said, is a little different, because people usually have this kind of, not to diminish anyone's testimony or their story, but when you hear of people finding God or coming to God, and they repented and they let go of all the things, God has always very much been a part of my life. And I don't really know what it's like to be an adult and struggle with addiction. So my story is a little bit different. I said that's why I was kind of like, okay, you want me to share my testimony? Like, what do I share? I don't know how this could benefit other people, but I'm sharing it. So you all take whatever you want from what I'm sharing, because I'm sure there's a message in here somewhere for someone. So after that point, my mom met my stepfather, and she this is still, like I said, part of my childhood, and he's who I call Dad, rest in peace. And he, for the first time, I got to experience what it was like to have a dad, to have someone that was involved, that actually cared about my grades and about my friendships and what I had going on, and was there to punish us if needed. And, it was just a really, really great time in my life. And that was my teen years. So there was absolutely a complete viewpoint, like complete change in what my understanding of a father was. Because I'm gonna say this, I felt led to say this, just because you didn't have a good father figure, just because you never had a mother, or mother figure, doesn't mean that you can't be a good mother or be a good father. Like, I think a lot of people kind of use that as like an excuse. Like, well, I never saw a two-parent home. I never had this. I never had that. But that's an excuse because there are a lot of things that you do. And I'm very blunt, there's a lot of things that you do that your mama didn't teach you how to do. So let's remove that logic. And yeah, so just having, that transition, like I said, with having a stepfather who I considered my dad, and it was just such a blessing to be able to experience that. And there was a time when I had to reconnect with my father, and I was afraid of him. Like, I didn't know who he was. Till this day, I know him and I love him and I've forgiven him, but I don't really know him, if that makes sense. Like, I haven't been able to kind of break through that hard shell, to really understand who he is and why he is the way that he is. Yeah, so the story still kind of goes on with with regard to things, I guess, happening to me. And I would say that I remember when we finally moved to Arlington, right? Backtrack to when we moved to Arlington, we had our apartment, and we ended up moving to this other apartment complex down the street where they would do vacation Bible school. And they would have like a little, they would have a church service inside of a vacant apartment, and they would break out, into the apartment rooms as like the classroom. It was really neat. And that is actually the first time that I learned about Jesus and who he is. And it was just through, singing and reading or learning about God's promises, and the kids stories that you hear like in children's church or Sunday school. And so that was actually the first time when I was about when we had moved to Arlington. I don't remember the exact age, maybe 7 years old. And I remember that we would go, and it was just for kids. And when the vacation, because it's usually during summertime, they said, well, make sure you let your parents know that you want to go to a church. And so I went and asked my mom, hey, can we go to a church? Like, they told us that we should find a church and we should go to church. And so my mom, she had actually gone through, like witchcraft. Someone had put a spell on her. So that was a whole nother, I'm telling you, we've been through some things. So I'm leaving some things out, but that was I had already experienced witchcraft, and kind of the power of that the devil has power too. And so we ended up finding a church, and we actually found it because she was dating this guy, and he spoke Spanish, but he was American. And anyway, he found a bilingual church, and it was like a really great fit. That ended up being my home church, or, that I grew up in. And I wanted to say all of this before getting to the next part. So, because it's relevant, I didn't think it was relevant until I was kind of going through everything. And I said, you know what, this is actually a relevant point. So the church that I grew up in, and this is no shade to any particular organization, but the church was very strict in that we were not allowed to cut our hair. We were not allowed to wear pants. We were not allowed to wear makeup, paint our nails. We had to wear the long dresses, long skirts. And I would say that I didn't learn everything there is to know about God and how God moves and how he works, right? His ways. And so I would say that did have an impact on how I went into my teenage years and into early adulthood. Why? Because it was more about the appearance of doing good, and specifically this. The message was that I do things because I love God, versus God loved me first, and so I do this, right? So I like to compare it to when you're married. Your husband or your wife doesn't have to tell you what you should or should not do because they love you and you love them. It's just like a natural thing for you to not cheat on them, right? There's certain things that you just will not do. You don't have to have a book of rules that say, don't do this, don't do that. And in some marriages, it's acceptable. That's a whole nother discussion for another day. But in this context of understanding the dynamic, I felt that I was here and God was up in the clouds. That's not the direct message, but subconsciously, this is what was happening, right? It's as long as I wear a skirt of a certain length, I don't paint my nails, I don't cut my hair, I do everything I'm supposed to do. Therefore, I'm supposed to be blessed and I'm supposed to have this. And subconsciously, again, because of how I was brought up with the influence of that particular church organization, it was also very works based mentality, right? Like if I do good, I do what I'm supposed to do. And the reason that people go through what they go through is because they're not living right. And it was very much giving Pharisee like Pharisees mentality. And it really affected my mind and my decision making. And also I didn't understand sex. Like everybody just knew you can't have it. It's disgusting. You don't talk about it. It's prohibited. And it was just one of those things that you just knew like was a big sin. And if you fornicated, you did something, that you weren't supposed to do, there's going to be consequences with that. So, but the problem was that we didn't focus on the relationship with God and understanding grace. So we felt that we needed to kind of be cast out or shamed, if you will, and shame and guilt kind of takes over when you make a mistake or when you sin against God, not understanding that God already manifested himself and he already died for our sins and he already died on the cross as Jesus in our place. So it was like, well, then what is grace? So with all that being said, fast forward to my high school years, because we had been through the situation with my stepfather where him and my mom got a divorce. It was a very nasty divorce, and it was bad. So that for me was very heartbreaking because I loved him, and being prohibited from speaking to him was like it felt like punishment to me, and we had to rebuild our life all over again. My junior year of high school, and it was really unfair to me and it was really hurtful. So I was vulnerable and I ended up dating who is now my daughter's dad. And we, when we started dating and everything, I ended up getting pregnant after high school. So at 18 years old, I was pregnant and I didn't know what to do. My mom was like, well, you're not going to stay at my house, especially, I don't know, y'all know Central American moms, Caribbean moms, like I feel like they're all the same. They're very aggressive. But my mom was like, I'm not playing no games. Like you are going to go live with them. And so it was just a lot because I was in community college. I was taking classes and I remember praying and asking God what do I do? I made a mistake and I love him, in my mind, like I love him. But I didn't know what to do. So my mom takes me to talk to the pastor and the pastor's like, well, you have to get married. And thinking back now and everything that happened after that, I'm like, that is the worst advice you could give someone. Like you're having a baby, so you have to marry this person and be with them for the rest of your life. Why? And so I remember after praying, because I prayed, I said, God, I don't know what to do. Like, tell me what to do. My mom, of course, believed in God as well. And she was like, well, I'm not going to tell you that you have to get married. I know the pastor said that, but pray because God is going to tell you what you need to do. I said, okay. So I go, I pray, and I had a dream that night that I was going to have a son. Till this day, I do not have a son. So spoiler alert. I had a dream that I had a little boy and he was taken from me. And so in the dream, I was like, I don't even know what I'm having yet. So how, it was the weirdest thing. So we end up deciding to move forward because at the time, my daughter's dad was like in agreement, and he said, well, yeah, we should get married if we're going to live together, because we don't have a choice. If we're going to live together, then we have to get married. So we started planning a wedding. I told my mom, this is what we decided to do. And I asked God again, like, send me a sign. Like, how do I know that I'm not supposed to get married? Or, am I even doing the right thing? I'm 18 years old, like, getting married is crazy. So 2 weeks before the wedding, I have another dream. And in that dream, I saw a lot of blood and I saw the miscarriage happening. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I got freaked out. And lo and behold, a few days later, I started to experience that cramping and some of those, signs with the bleeding. I went to the hospital. They did a ultrasound. They said, well, there's a heartbeat. Everything looks good. So I had already listened to the heartbeat. I had been told that I was 11 weeks. And so when I ended up going to the hospital, I'm sorry, that was when I had gone to like a regular doctor. So when I went to the hospital with, signs like that of like bleeding and things like that, they said, well, there's no heartbeat and you're only 6 weeks. And I'm like, no, they said, you're 5 weeks. And I'm like, how would I be 5 weeks if we've been planning this wedding because I was pregnant? So I knew something wasn't right. And they said, yeah, well, unfortunately, your body is going to naturally, get rid of the fetus. And I was like, okay. And it was crazy because it actually happened when I went to church that Sunday. I went to church and like it happened at church. It was the craziest thing. And I had to leave early. So that happened. And I remember someone saying, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get married. Like if you decided not to get married, like it's going to be okay. And I don't remember who said it, but I should have listened. And I was like, well, no, we're not getting married because of a particular reason, because I was hiding the pregnancy. I didn't tell everybody. They're like, well, I hope we don't get a baby shower invitation in 9 months or 7 months. I'm like, yeah, you will. So ended up having a miscarriage, very, very painful, emotionally and physically. It was very, very painful. And then we ended up moving forward with the wedding. We actually got married March, funny enough, March of 20. And then so we were married, and that's when I kind of started seeing like his ways. And I was like, he's not actually, because he started going to church because of me, but he didn't have a relationship with God. And I kind of started to see some patterns, some things that I did not like. And yeah, it was, he wasn't abusive, but I would say maybe emotionally it was a little bit abusive, and just kind of the role as a wife. And I could tell that because he was raised with like a kind of, I guess, traditional family. They're from Mexico, and their culture was a little different than mine, in that like the wife cooked every day and the husband worked and paid all the bills, and she just took care of the kids. And I was like, well, nobody like in my culture really, the women are like, the women are like in charge. I don't know. They're the ones out building or doing so, working, and so I think that dynamic of the different backgrounds really affected us, because it was like, and then just making fun of like my accent, when I speak Spanish, like, oh, or, it was just things like that that really kind of affected me. And I decided, because we had an incident where, he pushed me and I fell and I hit my head on the couch, and I was like, oh no, like that triggered me to the point that I was like, I'm going to start planning my exit, like expeditiously, And so the next incident that happened actually didn't happen. until I was pregnant with my daughter. So fast forward, I ended up pregnant again. We were married, and I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 12 years old. Zoe, my daughter's the best. So I ended up, pregnant with her, and I just knew, like, if this happens again, I am leaving. Because remember, childhood, I was like, if it starts small, it starts with the verbal and then the physical, and I don't need somebody to tell me twice that they don't want to be with me. I don't need to hear that more than once. So I remember telling my mom, because I was embarrassed, and it's like we'd only been married for a year, and I told her what happened. She said, "Look, you're going to go back, you're going to get counseling, you're going to do everything you can do." She said, "I don't like him." It's like, I don't like him. She said, "But I'm not going to be the one that's going to live with that decision, and I'm not going to basically allow you to just make an impulsive decision." She said, "Go back, work on your marriage, talk to the pastor, go to therapy, do everything that you need to do, so that if and when you leave, you can't ever say that you didn't try your best." And that's exactly what I did. I did my absolute best. I knew, hey, I'm in it long term, like I'm willing to do what it takes. And it didn't work out that way. So he ended up, we ended up having another argument, incident where he pushed me. I was 7.5 months pregnant, and I fell back on my head, and it was scary. And I remember laying on the floor, and I was like, this is the sign. Start saving money, start making a plan, and get out. And so my mom had gone to El Salvador to visit, and when she came back, she said, I wish I could say it the way she says it because it's so dramatic. It's so funny to me. But basically she was saying, like, when I come back, be ready with your decision. Like, what are you gonna do? It's your choice. So I said, okay. So my daughter, fast forward, my daughter was born. I was saving up my money. I had to save up my own money to throw myself my own baby shower. It was really sad. And then I said, okay, I'm going to wait until my daughter is like 3 months old or something. So sure enough, right at that, it was actually the week of our anniversary. I said, oh, I can't do it this week because it's our anniversary, and we already have dinner plans. I don't want to tell him at dinner. So I'm like talking to all my coworkers that I'm leaving him. And, everybody's like, did you do it yet? Did you do it? Because they knew, how he treated me. And finally I said, okay, like I made my decision. So I left. My daughter was 3.5 or 4 months at the time. And then I went to live with my mom for a little bit. And then my twin sister and I got our apartment together. So it was very liberating. It was a great feeling, and it's a decision that I don't regret till this day. I don't think that, and this is to encourage anyone who is in a situation where you're being abused and you're like, well, God says I can't get divorced. It's like, well, does God want you to be abused every day too? I don't think so. So I think that because of the church that I came from, where divorce was a huge no, where we had certain laws and rules in place that you just absolutely cannot do that, it was very empowering for me to have made that decision. And like I said, till this day, I'm very grateful that I did, because it could have absolutely gotten worse. I wholeheartedly believe that. And does divorce negatively impact children? Yes, I believe that. But the same way that my mom had the courage to divorce my dad, and my life ended up being, the influence that I had was much greater from my stepfather. That's what I carried with me when I made that decision, because I knew, you know what? She's going to be impacted negatively and have trauma whichever way I decide to go. Either I stay and she witnesses this, or I leave and she has the possibility of witnessing something greater. I do feel that I think because I always knew that God is with me. Like, God is with me. So, and I didn't fully understand grace. And that was, I would say I strayed away from church, but I never stopped believing in God and who he is. And I never dabbled into, drugs, and and I have my own, of course, everybody has their own thoughts and opinions on alcohol, wine, and things like that. I mean, I think there's a misconception when it comes to like drinking alcohol, for example, where, oh my gosh, alcohol is so bad. And it's like, well, if you actually read the Bible and you read the same Bible that I'm reading, and you understand that for some people, yes, because they have that addiction. There, people who have an addiction cannot have just one glass of wine. They cannot, right? But the way that I look at it is this, and this is for me, if it's not alcohol, if it's not cigarettes, if it's not this, it'll be insert blank. You can be addicted to anything. You can be addicted to pornography. You can be addicted to work. You can be addicted to success. You can be addicted to, and other things can become idols in your life. So I think for me, what I would consider straying from God would be if I just didn't act. I don't know. Like, I don't know what that would kind of look like for me, because it's almost like when you know who God is and you've seen that miracle and you've seen what he has done, like there is no turning back from that. Like you can't. It's like how? How can you? And it's not in a condemnation type of way, but I'm just saying, for me, how could I ever not acknowledge God in all my ways? Like, how? When you've been through that and you've seen that, there is no other explanation. There is no other belief. There is nothing else that anyone can say or do to change my mind. Like, because it's not me trying to prove like, oh, I love him. No, he loves me. Are you kidding? So I think that's where like I said, I may have strayed away from an organization, from a community, but it doesn't mean that you stray away from God. And that was another thing too that I saw, was that people didn't want to stray. When people, let's say, left the church, it was associated with they are leaving God. And that's false. Because if that particular church has a very toxic culture, toxic environment, it does happen. And there is even things like spiritual abuse that take place where they use the word of God and they twist it. Does that remind you of who else does that? Hint, hint, Satan. So there are still things that happen at churches that place is not for you, right? It may just not be for you, but it doesn't mean that you're straying away from God, because really it's just a building. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be connected to the body. You absolutely should get in community, and we need that, and the Bible talks about that. But I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving God if I leave this church. And I think my mom has always been that reinforcer and that person that, even though, yes, she was loyal to this church and she went to that church, it's okay if I choose to go somewhere else. Like it just felt good knowing that I had her support. So yeah, as far as straying from God, like I said, I made mistakes. I would slip up. I struggled, I struggled more with lust, if anything. That would be my testimony, would be lust. And it's very difficult to break when you have like, you're like, okay, I have a very high attraction or drive, and just trying to figure out like, okay, how do I like manage this? How do I handle this? Because these feelings are normal. It's normal for you to feel attracted to people that, that you like or that you're in relationship with, and yet still honor God. And I would say one of my biggest desires was to honor God with my life, with my body, with everything. And so it wasn't until I met my husband. So spoiler alert again, my husband is my third husband. And so this is the third time that I've been married. I've been married now, in June will be 2 years. We've been together for 3 years. And I got a lot of, jokes, criticism from people very close to me, because we didn't become intimate until our honeymoon night. And, it was really sad, because it was like, these are some of the people that are like, I don't know. It was just crazy to me that people were really, I tried to keep that aspect of our relationship private as much as possible, because I didn't want people to, I don't know, to ruin what God was doing. And so, but it's very beautiful in my opinion. I think it's amazing when you meet someone who loves God and has a relationship with him and wants and isn't going to compromise your values, and not just doing it for like, oh yay, I'm going to do this for her to impress her, but like genuinely they were already practicing that abstinence, or some people's abstinence or celibacy. And so that was a very challenging time for me because I knew like this is real, like you know uh and anything that I struggled with the enemy was going to do everything in his power to tempt me, and I had to be strong, and that for me was the most challenging time when it came to any, if you did have to call it an addiction, where I was challenged. And so I can relate to a certain degree when it comes to that feeling of dopamine, because that's what happens in the body, with addiction and things. It's like they get that high or they get that feeling, or drunk, and they continue to seek that again over and over and over again. And so I knew I had to fill, there was some area that needed to be replaced with time with God. So it was having to change the music. I couldn't listen to Tank. I couldn't listen to Chris Brown or whoever else, because it was gonna, be a trigger for me if I heard some songs. Now, if you're married, you do what you want to do. But I'm just saying that dating, I was like, okay, I have to be very, very intentional. No, no, I had to set certain kind of rules for myself, and which is why it's so important to have discernment and to really allow the Holy Spirit to guide you, because there was nobody was telling me now, I'm not at a church, or I'm not a child, I'm not a teen, where they're saying, hey, don't go here or don't do that. It's like the Holy Spirit is literally guiding, my guide, telling me, that's not a good idea. Don't give him a massage, or don't get a massage, or, don't do this, or don't go there, or don't wear that, because I knew that that was going to be either a stumbling block for him, or it was going to be like in those moments, when I would fall or, make a mistake, God was still with me. And I think for me, that's what has always kept me going, was I don't need to stray away from him, because even though I feel ashamed, I feel, embarrassed, like, oh my gosh, even though no one else knows, but God knows. And so it was like, I still always acknowledge him. And I would even say, God, can you just like remove the desire? Can you remove can you remove it? And I really felt like God was saying, no, I'm not going to remove it, because, and I know that sounds rough. I know that sounds harsh, but I'm going to tell you this. Some people that have struggled with, let's say, alcohol addiction, right? What they do, or what they try to do, from what I've seen people close to me and with drug addiction, is don't offer me anything to drink. I'm not going here. Like, alcohol is everywhere. So at some point, you need to be able to build those muscles. You need to be able to build the strength to say no. You can't just flee, right? You can't just fly away from every single temptation. You can't, and in my mind, I was like, well, if the Bible says that the enemy has already been defeated, why am I stressing about, I don't have to fight. God is fighting for me. So I just have to be wise, obviously, but I don't have to be so afraid of, oh my gosh, like kind of almost becoming borderline obsessed, right? Like there's some people that they want to make everyone aware that they don't drink. They want to make everyone aware that they are sober. And a lot of times, people do relapse, and they say, oh, I've been sober for this long, and they're counting the days, right? Well, I did that when it came to having sex. I literally would put like, nope, I didn't have sex today. It's been 14 days. It's been 22 days, and then boom, right? Because I'm focusing so much on what I'm not going to do, that I'm not even focused on what I should be doing or what I could be doing with my time, rather than just obsessing over what not to do. So I hope that makes sense for anyone out there of what I'm trying to say, when it comes to like strongholds in your life is, you don't have to continue counting the days. You don't have to, you can celebrate, nothing wrong with that, right? But ultimately it's not a reward, right? It's not a prize like, oh, look at me. No, yes, God gets the glory in all this, and it's great, and we celebrate you, and all that is great. However, if you see that it's starting to become almost a part of your identity, it essentially is kind of taking away from God's glory, right? And it can apply to many other different things like, oh, look, I've been able to overcome. It's one thing to share your testimony and to do that in the right setting or the right time, but you don't have to like kind of blurt it out. And I felt led to say that also because when I was divorced for the second time and I had moved back to Dallas because I had moved to Houston to be with him, he had gotten a position over there. He was a police officer. And when I moved back, I remember going to a church and I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." And I'm talking to one of the ladies and I'm like, "Oh, I just got divorced twice, I got married at 18 and I made a mistake." And like just telling her everything. And she was kind of like, "Okay." And I felt so embarrassed because I'm like, "Why am I telling everybody this?" Like, and that was the Holy Spirit convicting me like, you don't have to seek validation. You don't have to continue to just tell everybody the mistakes that you've made. It was almost like I had to justify what I did, and nobody cared about that. So like I said, some people, it's like, oh, because I met another young lady that kind of did a similar thing, and it was very difficult for me to bring it to her attention because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But it was like, oh, I was raped, I was this, I was that, and it was just shared with people that I could tell like didn't care. And it really hurt me because I was like, it hurt me for her because I was like, yikes, like these people aren't ready to receive. And the image that came to my mind was like throwing pearls to the swine, pearls to these pigs that like they don't they don't understand the value, they don't understand the grandiosity, they don't understand, um you know what I'm saying? Like everybody is not going to be able to receive that, and everybody's not going to give you that validation.
So, Norma, what has Jesus done in your life?
Rescued me, simple as that. Love me. The greatest gift of all is love, because love literally covers a multitude of sins. So I would say for me, who God is to me is God is love. And that covers everything. I would say that there will probably be a person that has gone through similar things, but everybody's story is so different. And I think what I would say is, again, to not allow yourself to operate from a victim mentality, because the fact that you were a victim, right? You actually were abused or you actually went through these things doesn't mean that you have to carry that mentality, that mindset, or that spirit, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't mean you have to carry that into your other relationships, right? Into your friendships, into the workplace, into just life in general. You don't have to carry that with you. And the greatest thing you can do for yourself is awareness. Become aware, get to know you. Like, I remember going through my divorce the second time, and my mom kind of challenged me to do this. And it was like, what does Liz like? What does Norma Liz enjoy? Why do I think the way that I do? And every single one of us was created in the image and likeness of God. That strong personality that you have that gets mistaken or misunderstood for rude, that's a gift, right? And the more that you become aware that, you know what, God created me this way and he created me this way for a purpose and for a specific reason, the more that you become aware and not what is the word, not like despise or like kind of reject with who God made you to be, the more you will really, really operate in and be everything that God created you to be. Because He will use that personality, He will use that talent, He will use all of that because He gave it to you. And ultimately, for what? It's for His glory, right? People need to meet someone like you that is very calculating. God will use even things like your ability to make people laugh. He will use things like your ability to be organized, right? The gift of hospitality, administration. And so just understanding like you, right? Your spiritual gifts, your personality. Take some of those personality tests. I highly recommend for you to take the Enneagram. I know there's some speculation around certain things and New Age and things, but the thing is that this is what I want to say too. The enemy can literally take the word of God, twist it to fit his agenda, and then now other people are, especially in the church, are like, oh my gosh, that's demonic, right? But God can literally use anything. And again, going back to that message, like God can use anyone or anything because He owns everything. He is the creator of all. So don't be afraid to use some of those tools to help you to gain a better understanding. Don't be afraid to go to therapy, right? You need Jesus still, but Jesus in therapy is good. Jesus in therapy is fine because you need to have a human aspect where they are trained, right? They have gone through the proper training and use discernment with that too. Everybody's not going to be a good fit for you. Maybe look for Christian counselors if that's what you desire. A lot of people do that, and they are very clearly, they're very open about being Christian and being believers and being counselors, therapists. So it's absolutely okay to do that. I went through a time, I don't want to take too much time, but I went through a particular program, and it was called The One University, and we were praying for the one, right? This is obviously before I met my husband, but after my second divorce, and we had certain activities that we did that were very liberating for me. And that's actually when my entrepreneurial journey started in 20 was it came through my awareness and coming through like God showing me who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing, like what is my purpose in life. And it really came through understanding me and building that awareness.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Norma. Norma. I still laugh at that. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony today. I know you at the beginning you mentioned that you didn't know what to share, but honestly, you will have similarities with someone out there. So you're gonna help somebody, believe it or not.
Thank you. I don't know how. I mean, but yeah, I definitely have hope that it will bless someone, and that that people feel empowered. Like even if you've never been through some of the things or made some of the decisions that I did, but just to be like, hey, like you're doing great.